shoot. I read on the other Madam Whipbash channel, and I forgot I had to cook. So come on, let's see. Let me see if I can get this buzzing out. Do I have it working? Can I make it work? Let's see if I do the music. Would that help? Let's see. I think that helps. Let's see if we can find something else. It doesn't really help. No, we're not going to listen to that. We're going to listen to this. What's night driving? I'm coming. I'm going to start reading. Just bear with me. Well, you should have had all this fixed before you went live, Madam Whipbash. Yeah. What's this one here? What you're listening to is called Feeding the Ducks. I want to see what this next one is. It doesn't seem to be playing. It doesn't seem to be playing. I switched it. Come on. Alright, we're going to stick with feeding the ducks. Alright, thank you for being patient. Here we go. Oh, that was a different one. Okay. Heading into chapter 9. Are y'all enjoying this book? I am. I'm baffled by a lot of stuff. And let me explain something to you. I read books the same way I read when I'm reading by myself, not live. I'm just reading the book. There's really no difference other than the fact that when I'm reading live, I'm speaking out my thoughts. When I'm reading to myself, I'm not speaking out loud. So I'm just translating my thoughts audibly as I read. And so if I pause, if I'm reading the book and something strikes me or whatever, or I gotta take a few moments to process what I've read, to kind of connect the dots, make sense of it, or I'm just in awe of what I read, or I'm befuddled or surprised, I might pause, and that's just the way I read. Alright, so here we go. Chapter 9, Makes You Stronger. November 1996, Manhattan, Kansas. I was fighting off homesickness by Thanksgiving and was glad to see my dad, who'd driven up to take me home for break. He would make the 4-hour round trip again in 5 days. This became a ritual of ours, going back and forth on Route 77, picking up fresh popcorn at a corner gas station along the way. As we passed through the changing colors of the fields and prairies, we'd spot deer, wild turkeys, and red-tailed hawks. Dad would point out silos and barns and made retirement plans. He wanted to buy an old homestead tucked near the Cottonwood River. I reminded him he'd be alone because Mom wasn't going to be having any of that. Dad often showed Mom and me an old barn near Florence. We had a running joke calling it Dad's retirement home. Dad knew Mom wouldn't ever live in a rundown place out in the boonies, and Mom believed he was kidding around. I don't think he was kidding. He had plans for that barn. He's been making plans for that barn on a daily basis, 90% of his day, pretty much, via fantasizing. Except after he was arrested, Dad shared extensively about nefarious plans involving barns and silos, this one in particular. So Dad had more than one joke running all the times we passed it. Now, he's spending his retirement in a maximum security prison. He's still out in the country, though. I bet. Over the fall, Grandpa Bill and Grandma Dorothea rode up one Saturday with my parents to visit the campus and have lunch at the downtown Applebee's. Grandpa was continuing to wear down, but was in good spirits that day. When they were preparing to leave, Grandpa hugged me tight and stepped back, putting his hands on my shoulders and looking into my eyes, making sure I was paying attention to what he wanted to say. I'm proud of you, kid. In November, Grandpa was well enough to escape the cancer wing. Frail and thin, he still greeted all of us on Thanksgiving Day with a smile, leaning on the black cast iron railing on his porch. Grandma insisted on hosting dinner for a crowd, and we cousins piled our plates high. We followed dinner with a game of Wahoo, yelling loudly, "Come on, Sixes!" We took the last pictures we would ever have with Grandpa that day, standing in front of his and Grandma's white mantled fireplace. My grandparents sat in front of us. Grandpa's hands clasped around Grandma's hands clasped around Grandpa's. He had been too weak to come downstairs to join us in Wahoo that day. I should have realized then how short our time with him would be. 4 weeks later, Silent Night was the last song we sang on Christmas Eve by candlelight in a darkened sanctuary, a sacred tradition in our old wooden church. Dad was an usher wearing a gray suit and a red tie, and he walked up the aisle lighting the first person's candle in each wooden pew. You know, they always said, the devil go to church too. Well, damn. That person turned to the next person, who then tilted their candle to the flame, one flame leading to 100 as the sanctuary warmed with dancing light. Standing between Grandma Eileen and Mom, sharing a green hymnal between us, I blended my voice with theirs, as I'd done for years. The light from the candles flickered off the stained glass windows. My stomach was in knots from trying to hold back my sorrow, and my voice quavered as I sang, "Sleep in heavenly peace." I took a big gulp of air and gave myself over to the tears. At the end of the song, we blew on our lights to extinguish them, and the church sat in dark stillness. As the lights came back on, a burned, acrid smell hung in the air. I nudged my grandma for some tissues, wiping hastily at my face. Mom and Grandma were dabbing their eyes too. Folks were passing by us in the aisle, wishing us Merry Christmas, with looks of uncertain solemnity. Yeah, that word. Our congregation knew we had lost Michelle 4 months ago and were facing losing Grandpa soon. This was the first year Grandpa Bill and Grandma Dorothea had not sat with us during Christmas Eve service, and the first year we would not be heading to their house afterward. On this night, their home sat in darkness while Grandma sat next to Grandpa in the ICU as he was succumbing to his battle. A do not resuscitate bracelet looped around his arm. Grandpa had been in and out of consciousness over the past week, trying to fight off an infection that was defeating his body. The doctors had told us days left at best. While standing in the empty sanctuary, I hugged Grandma Eileen and Granddad Palmer tight. They told me they would see me tomorrow for Christmas. Granddad, trying to get me to smile, joked, "You better get to bed early so Santa can come." Out on the fellowship hall, I followed my mom as she visited with folks, some of whom asked me about college. And although I skipped some classes over the fall and hadn't studied as hard as I could have, I finished the semester with a solid 3.33. By most standards, I'd done well, but my GPA wasn't high enough to stay in the honors program. The C's I received in 2 prerequisites, what did I say? For vet school, didn't bode well either. Every time I thought about my grades, my guts twisted. I could have tried harder. I made the choice not to do my best. 2 days after Christmas, Mom and Dad thought it was best for Brian and me to stay home while they went to sit with Grandma next to Grandpa. His heart was still in the fight, but his body was giving up. He wasn't expected to make it through the day. Sitting next to our Christmas tree, I spent the afternoon with the sniffles, curled up in our recliner under our brown and white blanket Grandma Dorothea had crocheted. When the phone rang, I knew the news before I picked it up. Mom's voice broke as she said, "Grandpa has gone on home now." Mom found comfort in the chime that went off in the hospital right after Grandpa died. It meant the baby had been born at almost the exact moment my grandpa passed. Mom told me later that Dad had wept over his father's body, wrecked with grief. He had walked hunched over down the hospital hallway, she said. "I don't think your dad had ever sat beside someone who died before." When I heard these words, you realizing why I'm pausing, right? I was a few seconds late before I realized what I just read. Mom told me later that Dad had wept over his father's body, wrecked with grief. He had walked hunched over down the hospital hallway. She said, his wife said, "I don't think your dad had ever sat beside someone who died before." Really? When I heard these words, I was filled with sorrow, picturing Dad next to Grandpa's frail body. Dad was grieved over the loss of his father. He had loved him very much. It's impossible for me to reckon that with Dad taking the lives of 10 innocent people. She said, I'm sorry, I gotta go back. She said, "I I don't think your dad had ever sat beside someone who died before. You know what that fool did? Now, his first murders was a family of 4. 3 of the children hadn't come home from school, or they were at school at the time he committed these murders. So it was the parents, a boy, I think he was 11, and a girl that was 9, son and daughter, right? I'm not going into graphic details with all of them, but I'll just say what he did to this 11-year-old boy. He bound that 11-year-old boy, laid him on the bed, and tied plastic bags over his head. And then Dennis Rader, aka BTK, pulled up a chair and sat down and watched that boy suffocate and die. So now you can understand why I had to pause and go back and read that snippet of a paragraph over again. Because how freaking ironic, to say the least. Our family gathered a few days later at the cemetery. Huddling under umbrellas, we buried Grandpa, age 74, on a rainy, wintry day. Sitting around Grandma Doritha's house that afternoon, I cheered up as stories filled the living room. Grandpa's 3 younger brothers spun tale after tale, much to the delight of the rest of us. January 1997, Manhattan, Kansas. I returned to college mid-January, the campus locked into frigid temperatures, the trees bare, the grass lying brown and dormant. I loathed winter, but I was relieved to be back in Manhattan because it was not Wichita, where we had to keep having funerals for people I loved. It'd been gut-wrenching to watch my grandpa waste away over the past 2 years. I knew he was at peace now, but I couldn't understand why he had to suffer. Why didn't God help him? I was hurting, lashing out at God and feeling guilty for my anger. God was holy, and I was supposed to be penitent. But I wasn't feeling remorseful for my anger. I was peeved. I'd been trying to walk away from God, and I thought I'd done it, but now he kept wrestling with me. Grandpa believed in him. If anyone was in heaven, Grandpa would be right there with Michelle. Around and around, losing Grandpa on top of Michelle was compounding my grief. I figured being back with my friends and having new classes would pull me out of the gray bleakness continuing to overtake me. But a shift began in my friendships, and small rifts began to form. On top of everything, I had the lousy idea to take on an unforgiving, self-induced 18-hour course load with 3 weekly science labs. What I didn't realize at the time was that I was going through my first bout of depression, and its sometimes companion anxiety was following right along, ganging up like a couple of mismatched roots. It would be another 10 years before I heard someone say the words, "You have anxiety and depression," in regard to myself. By the end of February, alternating between turning inward on myself, wanting to be alone, and lashing outward for feeling left out of our larger group of changing friends, I pushed Rita away. Deciding it was best to tiptoe around me, she would get ready in the early morning, gather her books and backpack, and quietly slip out the door. She wouldn't return till late at night, taking off her shoes before walking on our tile, afraid she would wake me up, trying to find peace for both of us. I'd been a good student in high school, excelling even in the hardest classes offered. Now, mid-semester, I floundered. I skipped classes, slept until noon, crammed late into the night before tests, and frantically printed off term papers minutes before they were due. I was killing my GPA, ruining my shot at veterinary school. I was even likely going to lose my scholarship that covered the cost of books and supplies each semester. I was disappointed in myself but didn't know how to get out of the vicious cycle. The smiling college students who'd visit our senior class the year before with bright colored brochures neglected to mention losing your mind as an elective course curriculum. This wasn't what college was supposed to be like. It wasn't what life was supposed to be like either. Days ended in tears, tossing and turning in my bed, silently screaming, raging inside at myself, at the ceiling, at a God who surely didn't exist. One March evening, while standing in the middle of my dorm room, I reached an empty gray nothing within myself. Maybe I could end it. I could jump. Walking with my shoulders hunched over, I reached my 4th floor window in a few steps. I pressed my head against the cool glass pane, fastened firmly in place. I wasn't high enough. I'd likely just break my leg or somehow land in a nearby pine tree. I turned away from the window and walked slowly over to my hard desk chair, sadness descending throughout my body as I sat down, lowering my head. I was in trouble. I reached out to a long-distance friend whom I'd been emailing back and forth since January, and although I didn't tell him I thought about jumping, he knew I was struggling and suggested to visit the mental health center on campus. Me? See a shrink? I'm not in that bad of a shape. I hated the thought of having to tell a stranger I was hurting, that I couldn't handle things on my own. Raiders dealt with their own crud in Kansas countryside tradition. Head down, dug in, doing whatever life called for next. Dealing with it in your own way and time, you'd eventually get over it. Or you wouldn't, but other folks wouldn't know you had it. But I wasn't getting over it. Resigned, I mustered enough courage to walk across campus to ask for help. While sitting in the waiting room holding a clipboard, I hesitated before marking the little box next to thoughts of suicide. My rear end landed on a couch in a little room where I threw soggy, falling apart tissues by the handful into my therapist's trash can over several weekly sessions. The therapist had me recall the day of Michelle's death in detail, desensitizing myself to it. My therapist said replaying an accident was a common reaction to trauma. It was also common to think you're seeing your lost loved ones among the living. 8 months after Michelle's funeral, I was finally beginning to face the loss. The therapist had me look at the hole I dug for myself, the one I wanted to crawl into and die, to honestly admit I was hurting. She didn't flinch when I told her I was angry with God. There was no shame in the little room with the warm listener and helper. In therapy, we worked on strategies to get through the remaining weeks of school and talked about what I was looking forward to, my upcoming Grand Canyon hiking trip. Oh Lord, did I skip something? Hey, did I skip something? No. chapter 9. Wait a minute. Because all of a sudden I'm up to chapter 11. Where was chapter 10? That was 8 and 9. There's no chapter 10. That was chapter 9. I'm just making sure that I ain't tripping. Oh, sorry, it's part 2. It looked like 11. Sorry, my bad. Make your way through the wilderness. See, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it? I am making a way in the wilderness and streams in the wasteland. That's Isaiah 43 and 19. Alright, coming up on chapter 10. Dusk is here and I gotta turn on a light. 1 second. I was tripping. Sorry about that. Hey, 2 people. Thank you for tuning in. Feel free to say hello in the chat. Alright, chapter 10. Know and respect your limitations. Yeah, right. That was the title. I read it just like that. Know and respect your limitations. Yeah, right. That's what it says. May 1997, Grand Canyon, Arizona. May 1997, huh? I have no idea what Simba could want. Dad thought this hiking trip was going to be great, and his daughter was doing great. He didn't know his girl had splintered inside over the past month and was still fighting at times to hold herself together. Tucked behind a tough facade, flippantly trying to look and act as expected, I felt like I'd miserably failed everyone around me instead. Failed myself. I'd scraped by with a bunch of C's my second semester, dodging questions about my classes on our drive over Memorial Day weekend to the Grand Canyon, my face flaming red. I was relieved school was out, glad to be free for 3 months, glad to be back with my family, and glad to be back at this magnificent park. Standing on the south rim of the Grand Canyon was breathing life back into me. The canyon dazzled with color, setting the world ablaze in flaming reds, burnt oranges, and rusty browns. It mesmerized with sweeping vistas, towering butts, narrow gorges, and sheer cliff faces. I loved it here, even if I questioned our sanity in backpacking below the rim. Are we really headed down there? I said as I elbowed my cousin AD. Whose idea was this again? At 5 feet 9, I was usually one of the taller ones in the group, but the guys had at least a few inches on me. AD grinned. It's his idea, he said, pointing to my dad, whose dark hair, cut military short, was beginning to salt and pepper, and so was his mustache. We were there to have an experience, as Dad put it. I knew behind his dark lenses, Dad's eyes were shining today. He was full of excitement that we had made it back here. It's going to be an adventure of a lifetime, guys, Dad said, spreading his arms wide over the view in front of us. See that thin brown line way down below? That's Tonto Trail. We will be coming across it around Battleship and up Bright Angel a week from now. Dad pointed to a massive red and orange rock formation rising high from the plateau below. Not we, you and the kids. My mom stood next to Aunt Donna. We're going to spend a week hiking in air-conditioned malls and sleeping in beds, not on rocks. Donna glanced between my parents and laughed. The girls, as my dad called them, were spending the afternoon sightseeing with us before heading to Phoenix to visit family. Reasonable sorts, they definitely didn't consider anything about what we had planned as vacation. But I was glad Dad had never considered me a girl. I much preferred going along with the guys instead of spending a week in malls, even though going along with Dad meant sleeping on rocks. I felt bad for my brother who, on our drive-in, threw up on the side of the road. Pale and nauseous, Brian was now sitting with his head down, facing away from the view. We grabbed a Sprite for my brother and sandwiches for us and ate lunch overlooking the rim. Day trippers were walking up the popular, well-maintained Bright Angel Trail. Based on the flip-flops, I surmised they'd only gone down a short way. A few heavily laden backcountry hikers came up the trail too, looking worn and unkempt, covered in red dirt. I wondered if watching Grandpa decline over the past 2 years had driven my dad to embrace his long-held dream of hiking the canyon before he wasn't able to anymore. Dad let age dog him often, wound on an internal clock ticking down that the rest of us couldn't see. He joked that when it was his time to go, we should just take him out to pasture. I didn't get it. He still seemed capable of whatever he set out to do. I sometimes had a hard time keeping up with him. He could be so full of energy and excitement. Dad had thrown himself into planning this trip, researching guides, shopping for the right supplies, and without fail, he followed the Boy Scout code. He'd be prepared. I felt ready with solid, great descent know-how, and my dad along. What the hell was that sentence? I'll read it again. I felt ready with solid, great descent know-how, and my dad along. I would follow him anywhere he wanted to go. He said we could handle a hike of this magnitude, and I believed him. I trusted him with my life. Do you realize she trusted in the devil? She believed the devil. She trusted the devil with her life, yet was angry with God and questioned his existence and just didn't want to deal with God no more. That's something to think about. That afternoon, Dad gazed out over the canyon, and Mom leaned in close to him, resting her chin against his back. She looked happy, content to be right where she was, but I knew she was going to miss us. I could tell she also was worried about what Dad had decided to undertake, especially with us kids along. Aunt Donna took pictures of us standing on the ledge that day, a bunch of naive, grinning folks, and one green-faced one with no idea of what was waiting down the way for us. If anyone should have known, it would have been Dad. But that's impossible to say, then or now. Day 1, South Rim. Our plan was to get up at the crack of dawn, as Dad said the night before, but none of us slept well in our small motel room near the rim. For me, it wasn't so much due to sleeping on the floor in a sleeping bag as it was my brother stepping over me to puke in the toilet. My cousin joined in the stepping over me and puking at least once too, in the toilet, not on me. My stomach wasn't feeling so great either, and I seriously contemplated it too, the puking, not the stepping over anyone. We checked out of our room and ate breakfast in the cafeteria, mulling over what to do about my brother, who was in no shape to hike with us after throwing up for 24 hours. He sat quietly next to us. I picked at my food, scooting watery eggs around on my plate. I wasn't sure if my stomach was off because breakfast was lousy, if I had the same bug my brother had, or because I was suffering from a growing case of nerves. We didn't want Brian to miss out on the trip, but we didn't want to miss out either. Ooh. Our backcountry permit was for specific nights and campsites. Use it or lose it. Dad filed for those permits a year ago. It would be a long time, if ever, before we got back out here. I'm sure my brother was feeling bad about holding us up, but it wasn't his fault. He was sick. We settled on finding another room in the park for my brother. He would stay there till he was fit enough to join us. Dad outlined a plan so Brian could hike down and meet us later in the week. He showed Brian the route and checked to make sure my brother had enough gear and food. Dad told him to take a bus to the trailhead and join us at Granite Rapids on day 2 or 3, or Monument Creek on day 4. Dad emphasized he would need to reach us in one day, hiking up to 10 miles because he would be carrying the only water filter. Drinking unfiltered water can lead to a double whammy out of both ends kind of sickness. Dad was getting more uptight as the clock kept ticking, but it took time to find a room and get my brother moved. It was also an unexpected expense. Money could stress out my dad, but my folks carried an emergency credit card for these reasons. I tried to keep Dad on an even keel because without Mom along, that job fell all on me. I also was the one who had to assure my brother he was going to be okay. I was on edge myself, trying to help my brother, managing my dad, and knowing we needed to get hiking. Looking back, I'm not sure why we didn't call Mom and Aunt Dana and Aunt Donna and ask them to come back from Phoenix to pick up Brian. We should have never told him to come down on his own. I can blame my dad here, but he isn't solely at fault. My brother, an adult, albeit a young one, made decisions too. I was culpable also because I hadn't fought against my dad's ideas. 10:30 a.m. Hermit Trailhead. Ooh, I'm curious. I wonder what's gonna happen. What happened? My stomach continued to roll as we drove west. A straightforward 7-mile drive to the trailhead, away from the more populated part of the park. Coming back east, we would be meandering for 30 miles over the next 6 days, down Hermit, across Tonto, up Bright Angel. I was feeling intimidated by the daunting task I was facing as I stared out our van window, catching glimpses of the canyon below. Fear, uncertainty was continually trying to creep in. I wanted this experience, but now I was questioning it. Can we really do this? Is this insanity? At the trailhead, I stepped out of the van onto chalky gravel and crouched down, tightening my hiking boots. I tugged on my army green laces, looping them around their top metal fasteners, securing them with a double knot. I tucked inside my boots were 2 layers of socks, a thin liner, and a thick summer weight blend. I was wearing cotton shorts and a cream-colored short-sleeved t-shirt. My hair was pulled back in a scrunchie and tucked under a cheap white ball cap. I pushed my sunglasses back up on my nose and secured my multicolored croaky strap around the back of my neck. Dad handed me my fanny pack with my water bottle. I turned to get my pack Dad had propped against the van, heaving it on my back with a loud oomph. I teetered, about to fall backward from its weight. "Whoa there," Dad said as he reached out to steady me. Helping to hold up my pack, he asked, "Too heavy?" "Nah, I've got it." I stood up straight. "Okay, you can let go." The padded shoulder strap sat down fully on my shoulders. I anchored thin black straps across my chest and thick ones around my waist with firm, resounding clicks. Shifting my weight forward, I tightened the straps and attempted to recenter myself to offset the mass on my back. The weight of what was on me and what was awaiting me down the trail settled into my bones. It was nearing 11 o'clock, a rather late start for an 8-mile hike. Dad kept checking his watch, and his mouth was set tight downward. I could tell he was anxious to get going. I was concerned, too, but I simply shrugged and uttered, as we passed by a large sign at the top of the trail, paraphrased as follows: "Warning, heat kills." Don't hike midday in the heat. The Colorado River at the bottom of the canyon is the only reliable water source. This is a remote, unmaintained trail. Know and respect your limitations. Rescue requests by ill and injured people are frequent. Deaths have occurred. Hike at your own risk. The park seeks your voluntary compliance. However, individuals creating a hazardous condition for themselves or others through unsafe hiking practices are subject to citation and or arrest. The first mile and a half of the Hermit Trail was familiar. We hiked this section 2 years ago. We headed down steep switchbacks that cut through creamy pink sandstone and passed by fossils and animal tracks left in ancient mud. Near the top of the trail, worn paved cobblestones remained. In the early 1900s, the stones were laid down to promote tourism via burros. Nowadays, the burros stuck to Bright Angel, and so did most of the tourists. Only the adventurous, capable, or possibly foolhardy were still willing to travel Hermit's remote reaches into the canyon. 80 took the lead, and behind him was Dad, whose hat for the canyon was a lightweight khaki boonie with a chin cord. It would keep the sun off his face and his growing bald spot. Dad's large navy blue backpack, weighed down with about anything we possibly could need, and likely things we didn't, was causing his broad shoulders to stoop over. Dad held a metal walking stick in his right hand with a black loop that went around his wrist. Next to each set of footprints Dad was leaving in the dust was an animal paw print made from the rubber foot of his stick. Small, colorful lizards darted across the trail with amazing speed right in front of my boots. Occasionally, one would stop in the middle of the path, attempting to stand its ground. Only a few inches long, it would puff its body out, bob its head up and down, laying claim to its tiny corner of desert. Another step by a boot would send it scurrying under rocks or cacti and bring forth a chuckle from one of us. I'd never hiked with a pack this heavy, and the extra weight dug down in my boots into my toes. I could feel my toenails pressed into the end of my toe box on the descents, even though I trimmed them back the night before. But my best guess, my pack weighed around 40 pounds. I was feeling every bit of that weight on my 120-pound frame. I was already analyzing the contents of my pack. I should have done another shakedown, a smart one, a really smart one, not the half-baked job I'd done. Now it was either carry all this crap on my back or chuck it. Noon, Hermit Trail. I was trying to find a balance between watching my foot placement on the narrow, rocky trail and remembering to look out at the overwhelmingly stunning, stark surroundings. Looking down over the drop-offs made my stomach queasy. Glancing up to where we come from was easier. I tried to settle my stomach, to ground myself back on the trail in front of me. I was trying to get my mind off the weight on my back, the sun bearing down, and the fruit punch Gatorade sloshing around in my stomach. I called up ahead to Dad and AD. Hey guys, I've got to stop for a few. I'm not feeling so well. It's too early to stop. We've only come a short way, Dad said as he pointed down the trail with his walking stick. Let's keep going. We can stop in another mile down in the basin where we can find shade to have lunch. I unfastened my pack and dropped it on the trail, plopping down on the rocks next to it. No, I need to eat something now. Stomach is empty. Digging around in the top of my pack looking for food. I didn't care. I was sitting under the blazing sun in stifling thick heat with no breeze. All right, we'll stop for a bit. Dad and AD set their packs down and joined me for an impromptu meal in the middle of a switchback. They seemed just as glad as I to have a break. I laid out my gallon-sized Ziploc bags full of portable lunches and snacks, settling on a package of warm tuna and bland wheat crackers that I washed down with more Gatorade. I didn't want to eat much. I had no idea how much food I would need over the next several days, and my stomach wasn't cooperating anyhow. I wadded up my wrappers and tucked them into another gallon bag. Whatever you carry in, you carry out. We ate quickly and helped each other get our packs back on. Why the heck were we carrying so much dang crap? I was afraid to look at my watch to calculate our rate of speed and the distance we still needed to cover. We made it down another switchback. Then my lunch decided to make a return trip up. Things were not starting well. At this point, I would play a song, but I can't do things like that because YouTube will give me a strike. But I need to take a break. Just for a minute or two. How are you enjoying the book? Leave your comments and let me know. I'm enjoying it. You know. It's just really deep. You know what? I was thinking, could we say that BTK has multiple personality disorders? And I was pondering that because, you know, you're seeing him as dad. He's just dad going hiking with his nephew and his daughter, you know, all that we've seen about him, being a father and a husband and an usher in the church. But then he's BTK. And I was pondering this, and I must say, I wouldn't classify him as someone who has multiple personality disorder. Because multiple means, at least 3 or more than 3. Multiple isn't 2. Being able to compartmentalize is not a feature of multiple personality disorders. Those are like 2 separate things. So no, I would not consider him. They call it something else, dissociative disorder. Anyway, I don't think he has a split personality. So there's Dennis Rader and there's BTK. Who is the dominant personality there? Is it Dennis Rader, father, husband, usher? Is that the dominant personality? Or is BTK the dominant personality? Does BTK control Dennis Rader, or does Dennis Rader control BTK? Just something I was thinking about. That's all. Okay, I'm getting back to the book. Chapter 11, Miscalculations of the Ego Can Be Deadly. 1 p.m., Waldron Basin. I felt better after emptying my stomach's contents onto the trail. I swigged some water, sloshed it around in my mouth, and spat it out saying, "Okay, let's go." I got a raised eyebrow from my cousin and a look of concern from my dad. "I'm fine, really, just nerves. I don't think it's what Brian has. Come on, this heat is something else. Let's find some shade." We kept hiking lower, passing by a century plant with a green stalk towering 10 feet over us. It would soon blossom, erupting with white flowers all along its stalk. They are known to flower once, sitting dormant as a small green plant for a decade or 2 before dazzling with their height and color. We came upon the basin where we had eaten lunch 2 years ago. It was a rare shady spot with rough scrub. Dad and AD stopped at an overlook to take pictures, but I found a gnarled pine to hide under. I sat squarely down, pack and all. It was a total pain to take the pack off and put it back on, and I was beginning to wear down. This was not going as planned. "Come on, kid. We need to keep moving." Dad was coming down the trail toward me, motioning. He stopped and unfolded a topographical map. "Not far around that bend is Santa Maria Spring, where we can top off our bottles." I took a deep breath, resigning myself with a sigh. All right, let's keep going. I was trying to talk myself into it. It would get better down the trail. It just been a rough beginning, a bad morning. And as I began to get up from the rocks I was sitting on, my stomach took to sloshing around again. Closing my eyes for a second, I was able to settle my guts back down. Steady. Steady now. AD reached out to help pull me up, and Dad said with a small grin, "That's my girl." I resettled my pack on my back and cinched the straps tighter. "Okay, let's go." The words coming from my mouth sounded more confident than I felt. 3 p.m., Santa Maria Spring. It was the middle of the afternoon and I had about had it. I'd never seen the canyon like this. I wasn't just looking down from the top or from the upper reaches of well-managed trails. I was smack dab in it on a remote, unmaintained, rock slide-prone, deserted, hairy-as crud trail. We hadn't seen anyone else in the last few hours, not since we passed through the basin where most day hikers turn around. I expected to see more people and found it eerie being by ourselves. We kept passing by cairns, piles of stacked rocks that marked the way. I found growing comfort in them. We would question the path. It would fade into its surroundings, and then we would spot a deliberate pile of rocks. Here's a cairn. Here's the trail. We stopped at a natural spring a while ago where the water came up through rock and out a pipe into a trough with brownish green algae growing in it. We siphoned the water through our small hand pump with a microfilter and into our bottles. We were glad to have the water and the shade provided by the small stone hut next to the spring. This wasn't like the hiking trip from 2 years ago. The warm daytime temperatures in the canyon had been welcoming compared to the cold on the rim. But now, 2 months later in the season, it felt like I'd stepped into a burning oven. The afternoon sun was unrelenting, continuing to bear down on top of us. My gear and my pack was drenched from my own sweat, barely stopped by a bandana I twisted around my neck. My hair kept falling out of the scrunchie, and I'd given up on my ball cap, which was making things worse, hotter. I'd risk the sunburn. At least my shades were keeping my eyes cool. My t-shirt was soaked though. I wondered if anyone could see the sports bra underneath it. That was soaked too, and so was my underwear underneath my shorts. My feet were drowning in their 2 sets of socks, and I was sure my toes were on fire. My bare legs were covered in red dust, kicked up from my boots hitting the trail. The dust covered up long, thin red scratches where cacti had been scratching my calves. What had I got myself into? Why be sane and hike and camp on the maintained trails with gobs of people, park rangers, bathrooms, and water flowing out of taps? Against sanity. That could sometimes be Dad, and now it appeared I'd join him, doing things the stubborn, thick-headed way and taking my cousin right along with us. In Dad's defense, the campsites for the sane trails were full by the time he filed for backcountry permits to stay overnight below the rim. He did try to request the more popular routes down to the river, the ones we hiked 2 years ago. Hermit was choice 3, and choice 3 is what we were given. We had found the top section of Hermit reasonable a few years ago, so we didn't have any reason to think it wouldn't continue to be that way. I gotta take a sip. Dad had read up on these trails. I would have thought he knew what we were getting into. The previous night, when we checked in at a ranger station to let the park service know where we were headed, the ranger had gone over the roughness of this trail after the basin, the importance of hiking early, and carrying plenty of water. We seriously underestimated what we had been told, and the warning sign we'd passed at the top hours ago. We'd only made it 4 miles, but I couldn't fathom turning back around and hiking up in defeat. The only direction I was willing to head was down. 5 p.m. Pima Point. We were cutting back and forth down sharp, short descents and taking long traverses that hugged massive orange and red walls rising high over steep drop-offs below. The path under our feet was rough, rocky in places, and narrow. It was only wide enough for one person at a time, and we proceeded cautiously, single file. Dad had me take the lead, letting the slowest one set the pace for the group. cans littered the trail here and there, but they could have been marking an altogether different trail for all the good they were doing. My guts were still rolling, my nerves now in full-on intimidation mode. I've never been afraid of heights, yet I couldn't shake the fear of falling. I've never been claustrophobic, yet I felt as if I was becoming unhinged, seized by panic. Of course, I'd never been pressed up against a sheer cliffside thousands of feet below and above solid ground before either. I was continually having to give myself a pep talk. Don't look down. Don't look down. Watch your feet. One boot at a time. One rock at a time. Eyes in front of you. Steady now. You have this. I reached out for the red wall I was up against. Heat radiated from it. My head was beginning to spin. Up was becoming down. Down was becoming up. I was staring into an abyss, a black hole. I wanted to quit, give up. I wanted it over, all of it. If I were to step a few feet more away from the wall and lean over the precarious drop-off, shifting the extra weight teetering upon my slight frame, I could go over, landing 1,000 feet below on jagged rocks. I closed my eyes and I could feel my body beginning to lean. Then warmth surrounded me, a strong presence pressed up against me right alongside the edge. It was comforting, peaceful, felt like something I knew, familiar. The same presence was in front of me too. It was only there for a moment, but it was enough. Deep inside me, something I knew before but had forgotten shook awake. I uttered a prayer in my head, help me. I don't want to die. I snapped out of it, shifting my weight back to my center, planting my feet firmly. I took a deep breath, shaking my head, trying to clear it, and I looked down at the rocks below where my broken body could be lying. I squeezed my eyes shut. I shook my head again. No, I wouldn't. Whoa, careful now, kid. Why don't you get closer to the wall as we keep going here? Came Dad's warm, steady voice from a few feet behind me, and I stepped back closer to the rock wall farther away from the drop-off and kept hiking, one boot in front of the other. My stomach was in painful knots, my body tense, tight. I felt ashamed. I tucked my head low, dejected, my shoulders hunched over, and not just from the physical weight on them. I can't tell Dad and AD, but that presence, it felt like angels. Grandpa Bill? Michelle? I thought for a second they were walking right beside me. Grandpa, warm, assured, with his big feet and his big heart, holding me up, pushing up right next to me. Michelle in front, a brilliant white light leading me, showing me the way down the path. But that's crazy, right? A bit of hope buoyed my soul. My countenance lifted for the first time in hours. 7 p.m. Breezy Point. All right. We hiked another half mile down the trail, then the trail disappeared. Small boulders in a tree had crashed down at some point and piled up, blocking our way. Come on! We came to a stop as we neared the pile, but it was too precarious and high to walk over. We decided to take off our packs and climb over. AD went first, going slowly, hand over hand, with his back to the drop-off. After he was over, Dad passed him one pack at a time. Dad helped me onto the red boulders, and I worked my way over, trying not to look down. AD helped me down. Dad came last. Whew! I gritted my teeth as I put my pack back on. My shoulders were about finished. A cairn marked the trail, continuing on the other side of the pile. We weren't the first ones to come across the rock fall. The sun was lowering, and soon it would drop behind the western reaches of the canyon. And we'd been hiking for 8 hours, covered 5.5 miles, and descended 2,000 feet. I was now teetering on empty, yet it was still another 2.5 miles to our campsite. Does this sound like fun to y'all? It actually sounds like fun to me. I like hiking. I've never done a hike like this. Most I ever hike is Kennesaw Mountain, and that's baby stuff. And I don't really hike with a backpack. I mean, I might have my backpack with Jumanji inside of it. This little Paco bird, it's called. It's really a backpack that's a cage for him. I've done that. That ain't nothing but, 5 pounds. But this sounds like fun. Disoriented, I hit my mental wall. Hey, if you're up there, we're in a bit of a jam here. Can you help us? Not long after I tossed out my plea, a rocky outcropping came into view, the first one in miles, big enough and flat enough to sleep on. It had a cool breeze and a stunning view. I tossed my pack down and declared, "Done." I plopped down. Dad had already gone about 20 feet past me down the trail, heading down a steep descent, trying to make out the trail with his small mag light. I stood up, hands on my hips, eyes blazing, hollering down to him with all the might I had left. "I'm staying here tonight." Dad turned and with a quizzical look walked back up to me. His face was ragged, tired, worn, his eyes small, darting side to side. He dug in his pocket and brought out a folded piece of typed white paper, thrusting it at me. Tapping on it with his finger, his voice tight, he said, "We don't have permission to camp here, only in the places listed on this permit." "There are no rangers around, Dad. There is no one around. No one cares." I waved my arms, pointing every which way to emphasize my point. "It's going to be pitch black soon. Someone is going to walk right off a cliff if we don't stop." I planted my feet, lowering my arms to my sides. I dropped my voice. "My legs are toast. I'm spent. We can try again in the morning." Dad turned to AD. "What do you think?" AD replied with a shrug. "This'll be all right." Using our flashlights, we put up a one-man tent for me, the one I lugged on my back all day, and a two-man for AD and Dad to share. The ground was too hard to drive stakes into, so we anchored our tents with rocks. Leaning through the tent flap, I unrolled my blue foam mat and purple sleeping bag. We took stock of our diminishing water supply and decided it wasn't smart to use water to rehydrate a package of dry food. So, for dinner, we settled on a hank of beef jerky, the consistency of a leather shoe, and a ration of a cup of water each till morning. I crashed for the night in my tent. My body rumbling from hunger, my lips parched and cracked, my throat choked with thirst. I longed for the water at the river far below. Worried about my brother, I wish there was a way to send him a note. Don't come down, too dangerous, too far, especially by yourself. Stay on the rim. This had been one of the hardest, longest days of my life, and now I was stuck on a ledge, pushed up against rock walls. I blamed my dad, his bright ideas and overestimating conceit. I blamed myself too, a willing adventure buddy with him. Mad at myself, sad I was willing to go over that cliff earlier today. Sure, I would never reach this much of a head-spinning, dizzying low point in my life again. At wit's end, exhausted, dang thirsty, going to sleep in the middle of a rock and desert wasteland. I trusted Dad. He said we could handle this trip. Instead, he risked all of our lives. Something in me grew up when I stood up to him. Dad could be scary when you pushed back, but he knew there was no reasoning with me. I knew he would cool off soon enough and be relieved to put his pack down and rest. After the arrest, he said he's like a pot slowly heating and occasionally blowing its lid. The key to surviving life with Dad? Watch the pot cautiously, turn down the heat, and know when to get out of its way before it blows. Chapter 12. The Milky Way makes an excellent night. So what did I read? 9 through 11? Let me see, is chapter 12 too long? Alright, I'll do chapter 12. Hope had risen anew. Light warmed my tent, bringing me back to life. I peeked my head out of the flap, finding myself greeted with a stunning sunrise, orange brilliance hitting peak expanses. The air was calm, the canyon was at peace. All was forgiven from the hard day before. Tucked tight into rocks 1,000 feet up in the air, I'd found some of the best sleep I'd ever had. Rested, I was ready to tackle the cathedral stairs. While partaking of a breakfast of trail mix with melted chocolate pieces and a few sips of water, we contemplated the toll our feet were taking. We passed around a nail trimmer, cutting back our toenails even shorter than we had at the rim, hoping to minimize the pain we endured yesterday on the steep descents. Got any hot spots, kids? Dad asked while inspecting his own feet carefully. Take care of them now. You don't want flare-ups turning into full blisters. I lifted each foot and worked slowly around my toes and sides of my feet, checking for any sores. Using tiny scissors that folded out of my small pink Swiss Army knife, I cut small squares from the soft moleskin Dad insisted I'd bring along. Peeling off the sticky backing, I stuck the patches on my red, unhappy skin. My feet protested as I put clean socks on. I slowly coaxed my feet into my boots with a slight groan. Feet tended to, boots firmly tightened, camp packed and placed on our backs. We set out, navigating down the stairs with clear-headed minds and more confident footing than we found yesterday. Looking out on the immense red-walled world around me, I felt awake, more so than I had in a long time. I could hear the beats in my chest. I could feel the air filling my lungs. I was alive. Descending 1,000 feet and 1.5 miles from last night's impromptu campsite, we reached the junction of Hermit and Tonto around mid-morning. My head and shoulders were up, not hunched over. I was doing this. I'd accomplished something. I'd hiked miles down into a canyon. It felt insane, but I was doing it. It felt dang good after the failures and losses of the past year. Well, that wasn't too bad, right, guys? My dad asked with such a slight chuckle and shake of his head. Good thing, though, we don't have to go back up that way, huh? I wearily looked back up where we had come from, bit my lower lip and muttered, "Yeah, good thing." AD shrugged. Nah, it wasn't that bad. He pointed to a large cairn on the wooden sign marking a fork in the trails. A lone lost sandal hung from the sign. Now which way do we go? Should we push on toward the Colorado River? I asked as I swished around the remaining water left in my last bottle. I was wishing for cold, unending water, a beach, and my flip-flops. Looking over his map, Dad took charge. East is the river and Granite Rapids, where we camped today. It's 4 miles away, though. He looked up toward the other direction. West is Hermit Creek, where we were supposed to camp last night. It's got water and should have shade. It's only 1 mile. We need to head there before we run dry, before the canyon heats up anymore today. So, 1 mile to water and 5 more to camp, I asked. Yes. We can't do another 4 without restocking our water supply. Got no chance. His face set, got no choice. His face set firm. He turned west toward Hermit Creek. Come on, let's go. The trek to the creek gently curved up and down through the Tonto Plain, only dropping 300 feet in elevation over 1 mile. It was a nice break after the hard miles along the rock wall yesterday and the steep descents earlier that morning. But Dad was right. The open plateau was heating up quick. My stomach was beginning to ache again, but I kept going, hoping with each downward crest of a hill we would arrive at the creek. We finally reached our destination, setting our packs down next to a good stream of flowing water. Almost 24 hours had passed since we stopped at the spring far above. I crouched down anxiously next to Dad, waiting for him to carefully siphon from the creek into our awaiting bottles. Water! I chugged half a Gatorade bottle's worth. Until these past 2 days, I'd never known what it was like to be without this basic necessity. To be thankful for simple water from a creek, and definitely not caring that it tasted faintly of iron and fruit punch. We ate lunch with our boots off, tempted to stay and lounge, but we decided to head on. Topping off our water containers, we felt assured we could make the 5 miles to our second campsite before nightfall. If Brian was heading down today, he would expect us to be at the river. We retraced our footsteps back near the junction. Less than 1 mile later, I felt wiped out again by the relentless midday sun. It was straight above our heads, small, bright, intense. Heat rose from the ground surrounding us, forming mirages. I became lightheaded. There was no clear-headed thinking now. I looked back at my dad, who was pale and quiet. The weight in his pack seemed to be getting to him. We should have stayed back at the creek for the rest of the day. I stopped on the trail, leaning over, holding my stomach. Hey guys, should we turn around, go back, and try again in the morning? AD spoke up. Over there's a huge boulder. I bet it has shade. Dad, what do you think? I asked, hoping I could cease moving. That will do, Dad said, resigned. It was hard to watch him be discouraged. I wasn't used to seeing him like this, physically weary. He was one of the strongest guys I knew. Come on, guys. Let's get out of the sun, I said, gesturing to a narrow, worn footpath that led to the boulder. We propped our packs up against it, took off our boots, stuffed our socks inside them, and lay down side by side under the shaded protection of the great rock. 5 p.m. We were woken late in the afternoon by the sound of voices coming down the trail. The first people we had seen since lunchtime the day before. An older man and a woman, fit, hiking lean with lightweight packs a quarter of the size of ours. They stopped and inquired with concern about us, 3 sleeping lizards under a rock. They tried to coax us back to Hermit Creek, but we stubbornly wanted to go on. We bid them a good trek and packed ourselves up, setting back out eastward. Since leaving our napping spot 2 hours ago, we'd been hiking steadily, but had only made it a mile. After passing the fork, we'd come over a ridge onto the broadening Tonto platform. Cope Butte was looming over us as we headed east, crunching dark reddish brown talus under our boots, surrounded by sparse vegetation. The greenish blue Colorado River was now only 800 tantalizing feet below us, but still miles away. I could taste it in the slight breeze blowing up from the inner gorge we were hiking above. We couldn't make out the steep drop to Monument Creek, which we would have to traverse to turn toward the river. After the drop would be another mile to Granite Rapids. God, any ideas? After ascending a never-ending darkening ridge that made me question my sanity, I stopped to catch my breath. Ready to stop, I said, "Sun is going down again, guys. We've got plenty of water. Could we..." What is this word? Could we... Oh, Lord. I'm going to pause. I'm going to dictionary.com because I've never seen this word before. And I'm not even going to try to pronounce it. I'm going to let dictionary pronounce it. Come on, where am I going? We are going to... I'm sorry, I gotta look this word up. Oh, there it goes. I've never seen this word before. B-I-V-O-U-A-C. I'm not even gonna try to pronounce it. I'm just gonna look it up. And I'm gonna let the dictionary. Hello, I'm pressing the thing. It should be saying it. What's the word? It won't say anything. The heck? Oh Lord, it started to. Okay, here it goes.
Bivouac.
Oh, bivouac. It's a noun. A military encampment made tents or improvised shelters, usually without shelter or protection from enemy fire. 2. The place used for such an encampment. As a verb, to rest or assemble in such an area, in camp.
Bivouac.
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 Okay. Sorry, but there was no way I was going to keep on going. Bivouac. We got plenty of water. Could we bivouac again? All right. Not long after I asked if we could stop, we came upon a jutting out large flat area on a plateau. We parked it. Ooh, that might be too loud. Hold on. Okay. Not long after I asked if we could stop, we came upon a jutting out large flat area on a plateau. We parked it and dined with a view. Dad took stock of our water and determined we had enough to cook with, measuring out what was needed, careful not to let any spill. He poured it into a lightweight metal pot and mixed in a dark reddish brown package of dehydrated barbecue meat. Dad attached a small red cylinder of cooking fuel to the backpacking stove, which sprang to life with a hiss and a hot blue-white flame. The pot went on the stove, and after a short time and some stirring, we had dinner. Barbecue stuffed in pita pockets. It's still to this day one of the best meals I have ever had and one of the finest locations ever to be found. AD became the hit of the evening, pulling out his pack of ginormous bag of sunflower seeds, cans of Welch's grape juice, and Sprite. Seriously, where was that last night? I fell over laughing with glee. Now life was getting good. I was so happy to be right there. Then I yelled, "To heck with tents. I'm sleeping out tonight." I laid down my plastic ground cloth, rolled out my mat, and tossed my sleeping bag down. "You've got a first-rate idea there, kid," Dad said, laying his bed rolled out next to mine. Not long after dinner, Dad and I scooted into our sleeping bags. We softly pointed out constellations to each other and the occasional shooting star. Some of the best moments of my life had been with him, outside, in quiet companionship, under the stars. I could hear his breath shallow and even out, and before long, he was gently snoring. I lay awake a while longer. I'd never seen the Milky Way this way, stretching across the sky. There was nowhere else in the world I'd rather, although precisely where we were was hard to say. Brian? Was he high above us? Coming down the Hermit? Maybe he'd wait for us on the rim. My stomach tightened, and I sent a silent plea out into the canyon. "Please, don't come down. Stay where you are. God, can you hear me?" Drifting, my thoughts faded into the canyon and out into wastelands. Day 3. Dad woke AD and me up while the light was still low and murky, wanting to get moving before the sun hit. I was ready to get going, knowing we would have an endless supply of cold water, hopefully before noon. I checked over my feet. The moleskin had worked. I put on clean socks, laced up my boots, and packed up my gear, surprised at how I was adapting. We set out on Tonto, continuing east, resounding massive butts and rising a stunting vista overlooking dark cliffs that dropped straight down into the river. Nearing Monument Creek, we dropped down along a steep, narrow footpath, taking switchbacks into the inner canyon below. This is not a place you want to be stumbling around in the dark, I thought. Monument Spire towered above, greeting us at the fork where we turned north. We stepped off our last switchback and found ourselves in a dry inner wash. Smooth reddish black rock loomed over us on both sides. While covering the last winding mile, our boots got slowed down in large rounded gravel. There was no trail, just cairns. They marked the trails all the way down, a source of solace. On this day, I bent down in the creek bed and built my own. Stacking rock upon rock atop the boulder was life affirming, hopeful. All right, so I have read chapter 9 through chapter 12. If you like, meet me on the other Madam Whip Ass Reads channel. I'm going back to the kept ones, the barge, the final years. I'm going back to read that. Thank you for stopping by, and peace.